Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Life often brings us to moments that feel overwhelming, where the weight of our circumstances seems impossible to carry. Perhaps you felt the pressure of a challenge so great that it left you questioning whether you could make it another day. It might be the loss of a loved one, financial instability, a broken relationship, or even an internal battle with fear and doubt. These moments are not uncommon, and they often test the very core of who we are. But I want to remind you of this truth tonight. It's hard, but let God handle it. When life throws its heaviest burdens upon us, we are quick to feel defeated. Our natural response is to look for solutions within our own strength, our own knowledge, and our own resources. We strategize, we calculate, and we work tirelessly to find a way out of the difficulty. And when our efforts fall short, we fall into despair, convinced that we failed. But challenges are not signs of defeat. They are invitations to elevate your perspective and deepen your trust in God. They are not meant to crush you, but to refine you. God never allows a challenge in your life without a purpose behind it. The challenges you face today are not the end of your story. They are part of a process that is meant to prepare you for the greatness that lies ahead. Too often we view difficulties as obstacles, when in reality they are opportunities. They are opportunities for growth, for faith, and for divine intervention. If everything in life were easy, we would have no need for faith. If we could solve every problem on our own, we would never turn to God for guidance or strength. But it is in the hardest moments that we find the greatest revelations of who God is and who we are in Him. The truth is, God's sovereignty is bigger than your struggles. When you look at your problem, you may see impossibility. But when God looks at it, He sees potential. He sees the opportunity to show His power, His love, and His faithfulness in your life. The God who created the heavens and the earth, who parted the Red Sea, who raised the dead, is the same God who is working in your situation right now. Nothing is too hard for Him. Nothing is beyond His ability to restore, heal, and transform. But here's the challenge: you have to let go. You have to trust Him. Trusting God means surrendering control, and surrendering control is not always easy. It goes against our human instincts. We want to fix things. We want answers. We want to see the whole picture. But God doesn't always show us the entire plan. He asks us to walk by faith and not by sight. Faith is the bridge between fear and triumph. It's what carries us through the storm when we can't see the shore. Faith is not the absence of doubt or fear. It is the choice to trust God in spite of them. Some of you may be holding on tightly to a situation right now, trying to figure it out, trying to make it work, trying to control the outcome. But let me remind you, the battle is not yours, it is the Lord's. When you surrender your situation to God, you are not giving up, you are giving it over to the one who knows exactly what to do with it. Surrendering is not a sign of weakness. It's a declaration of trust. It's saying, God, I can't do this on my own, but I know that you can. And when you let God handle it, something amazing happens. The very thing that was meant to break you begins to build you. The struggle you're in today is preparing you for the strength you'll need tomorrow. God uses the hard seasons of life to shape us, to grow us, and to equip us for the plans He has for us. You may not see it now, but there is purpose in your pain. There is growth in your struggle. There is a testimony being written in the middle of your trial. But none of this happens unless you make the decision to let go and let God take over. As long as you hold on to control, you limit what God can do in your life. But when you release it to Him, you'll open the door for miracles. You give God the freedom to work in ways that you could never imagine. So whatever you're facing tonight, no matter how hard it may seem, I urge you to let God handle it. Trust Him. Rest in His promises. Know that He is faithful. The same God who brought you through before will bring you through again. Life's greatest challenges are not the end, they are the beginning of something extraordinary. Remember, challenges are not signs of defeat. They are invitations to elevate your perspective and deepen your trust in God. When we face challenges, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by their size and intensity. Problems often have a way of magnifying themselves, convincing us that they are insurmountable. Whether it's a personal crisis, a health issue, or the uncertainty of tomorrow, the weight can seem crushing. In those moments, it's natural to feel small and powerless. But here's the truth: no matter the magnitude of your problem, God's power and purpose exceed its reach. God's sovereignty means He reigns supreme over all things. There is no situation too big for Him to handle, and no detail too small for Him to care about. The God who spoke the universe into existence, who holds the stars in place, and who commands the winds and waves is the same God who sees you in your struggle. He is not distant or indifferent. He is intimately involved in every aspect of your life, and He is fully capable of working all things together for your good. Think for a moment about the stories we find in Scripture. Over and over again, we see people facing impossible situations, only to witness God's sovereignty turn the tide. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army closing in behind them, it seemed like there was no way out. But God made a way where there was no way. He parted the sea and led His people to safety. When David stood before Goliath, a giant who seemed unbeatable, it wasn't David's strength or skill that brought victory. It was the power of God working through him. And when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, it wasn't his own cunning that kept him safe. It was God's sovereign hand shutting the mouths of the lions. These stories are not just ancient tales. They are reminders of who God is and what He is capable of. They show us that no matter how daunting the challenge may appear, God is greater. His power is not limited by our circumstances, and His purpose is not thwarted by our struggles. He is always in control, even when life feels out of control. But here's the part we often struggle with: God's sovereignty doesn't always align with our timeline or our understanding. There are moments when we pray for deliverance, and it doesn't come as quickly as we'd hoped. There are times when the storm doesn't pass right away, and we're left wondering if God sees us at all. In those moments, it's tempting to doubt His power or question His plan. But God's ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. What looks like a delay to us is often God's perfect timing. What feels like a setback is often a setup for something greater. It's important to remember that God's sovereignty doesn't mean life will be free of struggles. Jesus Himself said, "In this world you will have trouble. But take heart. I have overcome the world." Trouble is inevitable, but so is God's victory. He doesn't promise a life without storms. He promises to be with us in the storm. And when God is with you, no storm can defeat you. When you grasp the reality of God's sovereignty, it changes how you approach your struggles. Instead of being consumed by fear, you can rest in faith. Instead of focusing on the size of your problem, you can focus on the size of your God. Instead of trying to control the outcome, you can trust that God is already working behind the scenes in ways you cannot see. This trust doesn't come naturally. It's a choice we have to make daily. It's a decision to believe that God's power is greater than the pain you're experiencing, and that His purpose will prevail no matter what. It's a shift in perspective from seeing your struggle as an obstacle to seeing it as an opportunity for God to show His glory. No matter what you're facing right now, know this: your problem is not bigger than God. It may be too much for you, but it is never too much for Him. His strength is made perfect in your weakness, and His grace is sufficient for every trial. So lift your eyes from the problem and fix them on the one who holds the solution. Trust in His sovereignty, for He is not only able to handle your struggle, He is able to use it for your good and His glory. God's sovereignty is bigger than your struggles. It always has been, and it always will be. Life often brings us to a place where fear seems to take center stage. Fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of loss. These emotions can grip our hearts and paralyze us. When we're standing in the valley of uncertainty, Surrounded by the towering shadows of adversity, it's easy to feel like fear has the final word. But fear is not meant to define us or dictate our journey. Faith is the bridge that carries us from the valley of fear to the mountaintop of triumph. Faith doesn't eliminate challenges, but it changes how we face them. It transforms uncertainty into peace and adversity into testimony. Faith says, I may not see the way, but I trust the one who is making the way. It is not blind optimism or wishful thinking. It is a confident assurance in the character and promises of God. Faith anchors us in the truth that God is who He says He is, and that He will do what He has promised to do. Consider the disciples in the boat during the storm. They were terrified, convinced that the storm would be their end. But Jesus, calmly asleep in the boat, woke up and rebuked the wind and waves with a simple command, peace, be still. The storm obeyed Him, and the disciples were left in awe. What we learn from this moment is not just that Jesus has power over the storm, but that His presence is enough to calm the fear within us. Faith in Him transforms our panic into peace, even before the storm is resolved. Faith is not just about believing when things are good, it's about trusting when things are hard. It's easy to have faith when life is smooth, but real faith is forged in the fire of difficulty. It's in those moments of uncertainty, when you can't see the outcome, that faith shines brightest. Faith chooses to believe that God is at work, even when there's no evidence to prove it. It chooses to trust His plan, even when it doesn't make sense. Fear thrives in the unknown, but faith reminds us that we are never truly alone. Fear whispers that the situation is out of control, but faith declares that God is still in control. Fear focuses on the problem, while faith focuses on the provider. And when you walk by faith, fear begins to lose its grip. Faith doesn't just bring peace, it turns your trials into testimonies. Every time you choose faith over fear, you allow God to write a story of His goodness and power in your life. The challenges you face today can become the testimonies that inspire others tomorrow. When you trust God through the storm, you come out on the other side stronger, wiser, and more aware of His presence in your life. And as you share your story, you become a living example of what it means to triumph through faith. Look at the life of Abraham, the father of faith. God called him to leave everything he knew and go to a land he had never seen. He was promised descendants as numerous as the stars, even though he and his wife Sarah were well past childbearing age. By human standards, the promise seemed impossible, but Abraham chose to believe. His faith became the bridge that carried him through years of waiting, uncertainty, and challenges. And in the end, God fulfilled His promise, making Abraham a model of faith for generations to come. Faith also transforms how we see ourselves. Fear often tells us we're not enough, not strong enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough. But faith reminds us that it's not about our strength, it's about God's strength working through us. It's not about our worthiness, it's about His grace. Faith lifts our eyes from our limitations to God's limitless power. When you step onto the bridge of faith, you don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to see the whole path. You simply need to trust that the one who called you will lead you. Faith is not about understanding every detail, it's about believing in the one who holds every detail in His hands. So when fear tries to overwhelm you, let faith rise within you. When the road ahead looks uncertain, take the next step in faith. When adversity looms, remember that your story isn't over. God is still at work, and His plans for you are good. Faith will carry you through. It is the bridge that takes you from fear to triumph, from uncertainty to peace, and from adversity to a powerful testimony of God's faithfulness. In the world we live in, surrender is often seen as a sign of defeat. It's associated with giving up, with admitting failure, or with a lack of strength to press on. But in the kingdom of God, surrender carries a very different meaning. Surrender is not weakness, it is strength in the divine. It is a deliberate and powerful choice to hand over control to the one who is infinitely wiser, stronger, and more capable than we are. Giving control to God does not mean you failed, it means you've chosen the wisdom of the Creator over the limitations of man. Too often we wear ourselves out trying to solve problems that are beyond our ability to fix. We plan, we strive, and we struggle, convinced that if we just try a little harder or hold on a little tighter, we can make everything work. But life has a way of bringing us to moments where our strength runs out, where our resources are exhausted, and where our efforts fall short. And in those moments we are faced with a choice: continue relying on our own strength or surrender to God and allow Him to take over. Surrender is not a passive act, it is an active decision. It's saying, God, I recognize that I cannot do this on my own. I trust you to lead, to guide, and to provide. It's not about giving up, it's about giving in to the perfect will of God. When you surrender, you are not abandoning responsibility, you are aligning yourself with divine wisdom and allowing God to accomplish what you cannot. Think of a child holding a broken toy. The child wants to fix it but doesn't have the tools or the knowledge to do so. The parent, who knows exactly how to repair it, waits patiently for the child to hand it over. But as long as the child holds on tightly, the parent cannot intervene. It is only when the child lets go and surrenders the toy that the parent can begin the work of restoration. In the same way, God is waiting for us to release our broken pieces to Him. He is ready and willing to repair, restore, and redeem, but He will not force His way in. Surrender is the key that opens the door for His intervention. Surrendering to God requires trust, and trust is built on relationship. The more you know God, His character, His faithfulness, His love, the easier it becomes to trust Him. When you truly believe that God is good, that He has your best interests at heart, and that His plans for you are far greater than anything you could imagine, surrender becomes not a burden but a relief. It is the release of a weight you were never meant to carry. The Apostle Paul understood the power of surrender. In his second letter to the Corinthians, he wrote, "When I am weak, then I am strong." At first glance, this statement seems like a contradiction. How can weakness lead to strength? But Paul knew that his own strength was limited, while God's strength was limitless. By surrendering his weakness to God, Paul allowed God's power to work through him. The same is true for us. When we stop trying to rely on our own abilities and instead lean into God's strength, we tap into a power far greater than anything we possess on our own. Surrender also brings peace. One of the greatest sources of stress in life is the desire to control what we cannot control. We worry about the future, about outcomes, about things beyond our reach. But when you surrender to God, you let go of the need to have all the answers. You stop trying to manipulate circumstances and start trusting that God's plan is perfect. This doesn't mean you stop working or making wise decisions. It means you release the ultimate outcome into God's hands. And in that release, you find peace. Consider Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Facing the cross, he prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." In that moment, Jesus demonstrated the ultimate act of surrender. He didn't cling to his own desires or try to avoid the path before him. He trusted the Father's plan, even though it led through suffering, because he knew that surrender would ultimately lead to victory. Surrender is not a one-time event, it's a daily practice. Every day we are faced with situations that challenge us to either hold on or let go. And every day we have the opportunity to choose surrender not as a last resort, but as a first response. It is in surrendering that we find freedom, strength, and the ability to walk in the fullness of God's purpose for our lives. Giving control to God does not mean you failed. It means you've chosen the wisdom of the Creator over the limitations of man. It is an act of faith, a declaration of trust, and a pathway to peace. True strength is found not in holding on, but in letting go and allowing God to take his rightful place as the Lord of your life. Life's hard seasons often feel like relentless storms threatening to overwhelm and break us. In those moments, it's easy to question why such challenges are part of our journey. Why does life have to be so difficult? Why do we face struggles that seem too heavy to bear? But what if the hard times we endure are not merely obstacles, but instruments in the hands of a loving God? What if they are not meant to destroy us, but to equip us? The truth is, hard times refine, define, and prepare us for the greater purpose ahead. God, in His infinite wisdom, uses the difficulties of life as a training ground for our growth and development. Just as a diamond is formed under immense pressure and gold is purified by fire, so too are we refined through the challenges we face. It is in the hard seasons that our character is shaped, our faith is strengthened, and our purpose is revealed. These are not wasted moments, they are transformative seasons where God does His deepest work in us. Consider the story of Joseph in the Bible. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned, Joseph's life was marked by one hardship after another. Yet, through it all, God was equipping him. Every trial, every setback, every moment of pain was preparing Joseph for the position of leadership that awaited him. By the time he became second in command in Egypt, he had the wisdom, humility, and strength needed to fulfill his God-given purpose. The same is true for us. What feels like a setback today is often a setup for what God is preparing us to do tomorrow. Hard seasons also reveal who we are and who God is in ways that nothing else can. When everything is going well, it's easy to become comfortable, relying on our own abilities and forgetting our dependence on God. But in the midst of hardship, we are reminded of our limitations and His sufficiency. It's in the moments of struggle that we discover the depths of God's grace, the power of His presence, and the faithfulness of His promises. Hard times strip away the distractions and bring us face to face with the reality of who He is. Through these seasons, God equips us with qualities that cannot be developed in ease. Patience, perseverance, resilience, and trust are forged in the fire of adversity. These qualities are not just for our benefit, they prepare us to fulfill the calling God has placed on our lives. They enable us to face future challenges with confidence, to serve others with compassion, and to walk boldly in the purpose for which we were created. The Apostle Paul understood this well. Writing to the Romans, he said, "We also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope." Paul didn't rejoice in suffering because it was pleasant. He rejoiced because he understood its purpose. He knew that every trial was part of a process that was equipping him for something greater. Hard seasons also give us a testimony. They allow us to experience firsthand the faithfulness of God. And those experiences become stories we can share to encourage others. When we come through the fire, not only are we refined, but we also become a source of hope and inspiration to those who are still in it. Your story of how God carried you through a difficult time might be the very thing someone else needs to hear to believe that He can do the same for them. But equipping us doesn't mean the process will always make sense or feel comfortable. Often it's only in hindsight that we see how God was at work in the midst of our pain. The skills, lessons, and strength we gain during hard times may not be evident while we're in the thick of it, but they are being developed nonetheless. Like a potter shaping clay, God is molding us even when the process feels messy and uncertain. And let's not forget, God doesn't leave us alone in the hard seasons. He walks with us every step of the way, providing the strength we need to endure and the grace we need to grow. He is not a distant observer, but an ever-present help. His presence in the midst of our trials is both a comfort and a reminder that we are never without hope. So when you find yourself in the midst of a hard season, don't despair. Remember that God is equipping you. He is using the very thing that feels like it's breaking you to build you. The refining fire may be painful, but it is producing something priceless in you. The challenges you face are not wasted. They are part of God's greater plan to prepare you for the purpose ahead. Trust the process, trust His timing, and trust that He is working all things together for your good. In the battles of life, we often strive to fight with our own strength, relying on our intellect, resources, or sheer determination to overcome challenges. We analyze every angle, plan every step, and exhaust ourselves trying to control outcomes. Yet, Despite our best efforts, victory often eludes us. Why? Because the battles of life are not won by human might or effort alone. True victory comes when we let go and let God take control. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means surrendering the fight to the one who has already won. It is an act of trust, a declaration that God's will and timing are perfect, even when our understanding is limited. We serve a God who sees the end from the beginning, who knows every detail of our lives, and who works all things together for our good. When we relinquish control and align ourselves with His plans, we open the door for Him to move in ways we could never imagine. Think about the story of Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 20. When faced with a vast army that threatened to destroy his kingdom, Jehoshaphat didn't rely on his military strength or strategic planning. Instead, he sought God, declaring, "We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." God's response was clear: the battle is not yours, but God's. Jehoshaphat and his people didn't have to lift a sword. They simply stood in faith and obedience, worshiping as God delivered them from their enemies. This story reminds us that when we let go of our need to control and trust in God's power, He fights for us. Victory requires yielding to God's will, even when it differs from our desires. We may have a specific outcome in mind, but God's plans are always higher and better. His timing is perfect, even when it feels delayed. Letting go means releasing our grip on what we think we need and trusting that God knows what's best. It means praying, "Not my will, but yours be done," just as Jesus did in the Garden of Gethsemane. Letting God take control also means releasing fear and anxiety. How often do we carry the weight of worry, trying to predict and prevent every possible problem? But Jesus invites us to cast our cares on Him because He cares for us. He reminds us that we cannot add a single hour to our lives by worrying. Victory comes when we lay our burdens at His feet and rest in the assurance that He is in control. This kind of trust is not passive, it is active faith. It involves taking our hands off the steering wheel and allowing God to direct our paths, even when the road ahead is unclear. It requires obedience, stepping out in faith when He calls, and staying still when He says to wait. It's not always easy, but it is always worth it. Look at the walls of Jericho. God instructed Joshua and the Israelites to march around the city for 7 days, blowing trumpets and shouting on the final day. By human standards, this strategy made no sense. But Joshua let go of logic and followed God's instructions. On the 7th day, the walls came down, and victory was theirs not because of their might, but because they trusted and obeyed God. When we let go and let God, we shift the focus from our limitations to His limitless power. We acknowledge that we are not the source of our victory, He is. It's not our strength, wisdom, or efforts that bring about breakthrough. It's His grace, His power, and His timing. This shift in perspective changes how we approach life's battles. Instead of fighting with frustration, we fight with faith. Instead of striving, we surrender. Instead of trying to figure it all out, we trust the one who already has. And in that place of surrender, we find peace that surpasses understanding, knowing that the battle is not ours to win, but God's to deliver. Victory doesn't mean the absence of challenges, it means overcoming them through God's power. It means standing firm in faith even when the outcome is uncertain, and trusting that God is working behind the scenes. It means rejoicing, not because the battle is easy, but because we know the one who holds the victory. So whatever battle you are facing today, remember this: you are not called to fight it alone. Lay down your weapons of self-reliance and pick up the shield of faith. Let go of your need to control and let God take the lead. Trust His will, lean on His timing, and rest in His promises. When you let go and let God, you step into a place of divine strength, unshakable peace, and ultimate victory. In closing, let me remind you that life is not without its challenges, but those challenges are not the end of your story. They are the divine tools that shape you, strengthen you, and position you for purpose. When the weight feels unbearable, let God carry it. When fear grips your heart, let faith guide your steps. When the storms rage and your strength runs out, surrender to the one whose power never fails. Understand this: you were never meant to navigate life's trials in your own strength. Victory is not about how hard you fight, but about how deeply you trust. It's about yielding to God's will, embracing His timing, and walking in the confidence that He is faithful to finish what He has started in you. Let every struggle refine you, every challenge prepare you, and every setback become a setup for the greater things ahead. You serve a God who turns mourning into dancing, weakness into strength, and battles into testimonies of triumph. So, let go of your fears, your doubts, and your need to control, and let God be God in your life. The path may not always be easy, but it is always worth it. For in every hardship He is equipping you. In every delay He is developing you. And in every battle He is fighting for you. Trust Him, surrender to Him, and watch as He does exceedingly, abundantly above all you could ask or think. Now walk forward in faith, knowing that your victory is secure not because of what you can do, but because of who He is. Let God handle it, and let His glory shine through you. Your best is yet to come.